I don't talk much, mister, but I can cook. The rancher looked at her and said, "You're hired." The shuttle looked like it had survived 3 bad landings and 1 argument with gravity. It came down slow over the red-brown plain, its thrusters coughing dust into the air and making the dry grass flatten like it was bowing. When it finally settled on the hard-packed ground, the wind pushed the dust around the ranch yard in lazy circles. Korath stood on the porch of the main house and watched without moving. He was tall even for his kind, with wide shoulders and a heavy coat made from local hide. His face, bony ridges and thick skin, showed nothing, but his eyes stayed sharp. Behind him, the door creaked as someone inside shifted to get a better look. "Another drifter," his foreman, Jessa, muttered. She was smaller than him and quicker, with a belt full of tools and a look that said she trusted machines more than people. "Could be," Korath said. On Cauldron's Reach, drifters arrived often enough. Some wanted work, some wanted shelter, some wanted to hide. The frontier pulled in the desperate the way a storm pulled in loose dirt. Most were trouble even when they smiled. The shuttle hatch opened with a hiss. A ramp slid down, scraping a line into the dust. For a moment nothing moved, and then a figure stepped into the light. A human. Korath narrowed his eyes. Humans were not rare in the wider galaxy, but on this edge world they usually came for 2 reasons: salvage and contracts. They worked fast, asked few questions, and left when the job was done. They also had a reputation for being loud, proud, and certain they could fix anything with stubbornness and metal. This human did not match that picture. She was small, wrapped in a plain travel coat that was too big for her frame. A hood shadowed her face. She carried a single bag, not a crate of gear. No weapon was visible, though Korath had learned long ago that humans did not always carry weapons where you could see them. Her boots were scuffed. Her steps were careful, like she was counting the ground under her. She walked up to the porch and stopped at the bottom step. She did not look around like someone searching for exits. She did not pretend to be friendly. She simply waited, hands at her sides, as if patience was a tool she knew well. Korath stayed on the porch. He did not like standing below strangers. "State your purpose," he said. The human lifted her head. Her face was pale from travel and sun, with tired eyes that still held focus. Her hair was tied back, dark and messy from the ride. She looked at him like she was measuring distance, weight, and mood all at once. "I'm looking for work," she said. Her voice was calm, low. She spoke basic clearly, but with an accent he could not place. "What kind of work?" Jessa asked from behind him. The human's gaze flicked to Jessa and back to Korath. "Kitchen," she said. Jessa made a sharp sound, almost a laugh. "Kitchen." Korath did not laugh. He simply watched. "This is a ranch," he said. "We herd, we trade, we repair fences, we patch wounds, we keep beasts from breaking through the pens. We don't hire people for kitchen." The human nodded once, like she had expected that answer. "I don't talk much, mister," she said, and her eyes held his without challenge. "But I can cook." The words were simple. The way she said them was not proud, it was not begging. It was like offering a fact the way you might offer the weather. Korath felt something shift in the quiet of the porch. It was not trust, not yet, but it was attention. Cooking was not a minor thing out here. Supplies were thin. People worked long hours in heat and dust. Bad food made tempers sharper and bodies weaker. Good food made a crew last. Still, hiring a human cook sounded like a strange story someone would tell over cheap drink. "Why here?" Korath asked. The human hesitated. For the first time, her calm cracked just a little, as if a memory pressed against her ribs. Then she spoke again, steady. "Because this place is far," she said, "and you look like you need help." Jessa snorted. "We don't need help from a human with a pot." Korath raised a hand, and Jessa went quiet, though her eyes stayed hard. Korath leaned slightly forward. "Name." The human took a breath. "Mara," she said. "Family name?" She shook her head once. "Just Mara." On the frontier, people sometimes dropped their last names like they dropped old skin. Korath had seen it before. "What do you want in return?" he asked. "Food," Mara said. "A place to sleep, small pay." Jessa stepped forward enough for Korath to see her expression clearly. "This is foolish," she said quietly. "We can barely keep the power cells stable. We aren't running a hostel." Korath did not answer right away. He studied Mara's bag. It was not heavy, no obvious tools, no obvious smuggling compartments. He listened for the rhythm of her breathing, not fast, not shaky. She was not scared of them, but she was also not reckless. That was rare. "If you can cook," he said, "prove it." Mara looked past him toward the ranch house. "Your kitchen?" she asked. Korath nodded. You get one meal, use what we have. If my crew eats it and doesn't complain, you can stay for a trial week. Jessa's mouth opened, but Korath's look stopped her. Mara did not smile. She simply stepped up onto the porch, followed Korath inside, and waited while he unlocked the kitchen storage. The kitchen was plain. A heat plate, a small oven, a cutting surface, and metal shelves holding sealed ration boxes and a few crates of dried produce. Cauldron's reach was not kind to crops. Most fresh food came from trade shipments or careful greenhouse work, and both were unreliable. Korath opened the storage and gestured. "That's what we have. Make it count." Myra stepped forward and began to look through the supplies. She did not touch anything at first. She read labels, checked dates, listened to the sound of containers when she shook them lightly. Her hands were steady. She moved with the quiet focus of someone who had cooked in worse places than this. Jessa leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You'll find that our supplies aren't human-friendly," she said. Mara glanced at her. "Food is food," she said simply. She pulled out a pack of dried root strips, a jar of fermented paste, a block of tough preserved protein from local stock, and a small bag of grain. She asked for water. Korath pointed to the filter tap. Then she started. She set water to heat, then cut the protein into thin slices with a sharpness that surprised Korath. The blade moved quick, efficient, no wasted motion. She soaked the slices, not long enough to make them soft, but long enough to wake them up. She toasted the grain in a dry pan until it gave off a warm smell, nutty and deep. The scent spread, and Korath realized how long it had been since he smelled something like that in this house. Most of their meals were functional. Heat the ration, add salt, eat fast, go back to work. Myra stirred the fermented paste into the water with careful timing, not dumping it all at once, but letting it blend. She added the roots, then the protein, and lowered the heat. She crushed a few dried herbs in her palm, something from the corner of the shelf that no one used because it was too bitter, and sprinkled them in. Jessa's eyes narrowed. "That herb is for treating stomach bugs." Myra nodded without looking up. "Small amount," she said. "It adds balance." She worked like she trusted her senses more than recipes. She tasted the broth and adjusted with tiny pinches from a salt pouch, a drop of oil, a second dash of herb. When she set a covered pot aside to simmer, she turned to the oven and started a flatbread with the toasted grain, water, and a small portion of fat. She kneaded quickly, then pressed the dough thin and let it cook hot so it would puff and brown. Korath watched, still suspicious, but unable to ignore the simple competence. No speech, no show, just work. The crew came in one by one as the smell traveled, dusty boots on the floor, tired bodies that tried to pretend they weren't tired. The ranch had 8 hands besides Korath, and when food was ready they moved like a herd drawn by instinct. They stopped when they saw Mara. A few frowned. One of the younger workers, Ven, tilted his head. "Human?" he asked. Korath answered before anyone else could. "She wants work, she's cooking one meal, eat it or don't, then we decide." Some looked unsure, others looked annoyed. Humans were known for taking jobs and then leaving chaos behind. It was easier to hate them than risk being disappointed. Mara did not react to their stares. She set bowls out. She poured broth carefully, making sure each bowl had enough protein and root. She placed the flatbread beside each bowl, still warm, and the bread crackled as it cooled. "Sit," she said, not as an order, but as a suggestion that felt like a habit. The crew sat. The first spoonful was cautious. Korath watched faces as they tasted. Then something strange happened. No one spoke, not the good kind of silence that comes from fear, not the sharp silence after a fight. This was different. It was the silence of attention, of people who did not want to break the moment. Jessa tasted hers last, as if she was determined not to be impressed. She took a small bite. Her eyes widened slightly before she forced her face back into control. She took another bite, bigger this time. Ven exhaled slowly. "That's good," he said, like the word was foreign in this kitchen. Another worker, Leo, looked up. "How did you make ration protein taste like that?" Mara shrugged. "Time," she said. "Heat, salt, balance." Korath tasted his bowl. The broth was rich without being heavy. It warmed his chest and made his stomach unclench in a way he hadn't noticed it was clenched. The flatbread was simple, but it had a crisp edge and a soft center, and it made the broth feel like a meal instead of a survival measure. He looked at Mara. She did not watch them eat with pride. She watched like she was checking if the food did what it was supposed to do, make bodies stronger and minds calmer. The crew finished. No one complained. No one pushed their bowl away. A few scraped the bottom like they didn't want to waste a drop. That alone was worth something. Korath set his bowl down. "You cooked," he said. Myra nodded. Jessa cleared her throat. "It could be luck," she said, though she didn't sound convinced. Myra looked at her. "Luck doesn't need dough," she said. A few workers chuckled softly. It was the first laughter Korath had heard in the house in days. Korath leaned back in his chair. He considered the ranch, considered the next weeks, considered the thin supply schedule and the growing problems at the outer pens. Considered the way his crew's shoulders had relaxed while eating, just a fraction, like someone had loosened straps they didn't know were digging in. "You said a trial week," he said. Myra waited. Korath stood. His joints made a quiet sound from long work. He looked at her with the same careful judgment he used when buying livestock at the market. "You don't talk much," he said, "but you can cook." Myra's face stayed calm, but her eyes softened just a little, like she had been bracing for rejection and could finally set the weight down. Korath held her gaze and made his decision out loud so everyone could hear. "You're hired," he said. Jessa's lips pressed into a line. "Boss, 1 week," Korath said, cutting her off without harshness. "She earns her place. If she causes trouble, she leaves. If she helps, we keep her." Myra nodded once. "I won't cause trouble," she said. Korath pointed toward the back hall. "Spare room, small. You keep it clean. You work mornings and nights. Midday is your choice, but if the crew needs you, you answer." Myra gave another small nod. "Understood." As the crew started to drift out, some returning to the yard and others lingering as if the kitchen had become a warmer place than the rest of the house, Korath watched Myra clean. She washed bowls without being asked. She wiped surfaces. She put the remaining bread in a sealed container. She checked the storage again and wrote something on a small scrap of paper she pulled from her pocket. A list, maybe. A plan. Jessa stayed behind, still suspicious. "Humans don't take kitchen jobs out here," she said. Mara rinsed her hands. "Someone has to," she replied. "That's not an answer." Mara met Jessa's eyes. "It's enough," she said quietly. Jessa stared at her, then looked away, frustrated. "If you try anything," Mara's voice stayed calm, "I won't." Jessa left, boots loud, like she wanted the house to know she didn't approve. Korath remained. He had questions, many questions, but he also knew the frontier taught people to keep some questions for later. "What happened to your last place?" he asked. Mara paused. The quiet returned, heavier this time. She set the towel down carefully, like she didn't trust her hands to be careless. "It ended," she said. Korath waited. Myra's throat moved as she swallowed. "I don't want to talk about it," she added. "Not now," Korath nodded once. He understood that. People out here carried endings like stones in their pockets. He walked to the door and looked outside. The sun was lower now, turning the dust gold. In the distance, beyond the fences, the herd moved like a slow tide, massive shapes with thick hides and heavy heads, creatures that could break a grown worker in half if handled wrong. The ranch depended on routine and trust. If either failed, everything failed. He turned back to Myra. She had taken off her coat and hung it neatly. Under it, she wore a simple shirt with sleeves rolled up, arms marked with small old scars that looked like burns and cuts from hard work. Not fresh, not dramatic, just proof of a life that had demanded effort. "You'll start at dawn," Korath said. Myra nodded. "I'll be ready." Korath stepped out of the kitchen. At the hall, he stopped and looked back one last time. Myra stood in the doorway of the kitchen, light behind her, face still and quiet. She looked like someone who had been alone for a long time, but hadn't forgotten how to be useful. Korath did not trust easily. He had built this ranch with his own hands and lost too much to bad deals and worse people. But as he walked out toward the yard, he realized something simple and strange. For the first time in weeks, he was looking forward to the end of the day. Not because the work would be easier. Because the meal might be better. Myra woke before the sun, though the sky had not yet decided to burn gold over the plains. The small room Korath had assigned her smelled faintly of dust and dried herbs from the kitchen below. She rose quietly, careful not to wake the few workers still asleep on the floor above the storage room. Her boots were ready by the door, dusted lightly with starch from yesterday's flour. She stepped into the hall. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of settling wood. The air smelled of the outside, of metal fences and dry grass, mixed with the faint aroma of yesterday's meal. Mara paused in the doorway of the kitchen, watching the empty space. Pots hung on hooks, knives were lined neatly, and the table stood ready. She smiled faintly, the first in many days, and began work. water boiled for tea. The grains she had toasted the night before were measured carefully and soaked in a little oil and water to be baked into morning flatbread. She chopped roots, not rushing, not hesitating, feeling the weight of the blade, letting her hands do the thinking. When Korath entered, the smell had already begun to climb the stairs. He paused, noticing the faint warmth that had spread through the empty kitchen, something he had not realized he missed. He cleared his throat. "You've started early," he said, his voice low. Myra did not look at him. "Best way to be ready," she said. He studied her. She moved silently, precise, not nervous, not seeking approval. She worked like the kitchen had always belonged to her. Korath had seen humans work in fields, machines, and labs, but he had never seen one move through a kitchen with such careful control, turning limited supplies into something almost alive. "I'll eat with the crew," he said, more to himself than to her. "You're cooking for more than just yourself," Myra nodded. "I know." The crew appeared one by one as the sun lifted above the horizon. The workers were cautious, as always when new food was offered. They had eaten Myra's meals before, but the frontier taught that yesterday's success could not guarantee today's. They had seen cooks who left bitter water for soup or burned grain to a black crunch. Myra placed bowls carefully on the long table. She poured the broth, sliced the flatbread into even portions, and added roots and small pieces of protein with care. Each piece was measured for balance. Not too much, not too little, enough to fill the stomach and awaken energy for a long day of labor. "Sit," she said quietly. Her voice did not command, but it invited. The crew hesitated. Then slowly they did. Korath sat at the head of the table. Myra served him last, setting his bowl with the same care she had given the others. She poured tea for everyone from a small metal kettle, the steam rising in soft curls, mingling with the smell of cooking. Silence fell again, not the tense kind, but the one that follows respect. Each spoonful was careful, each bite measured. Eyes flicked to Myra only briefly before returning to the bowls. She moved between them, quietly refilling small portions, adjusting seasoning for those whose tastes were different, and speaking only when necessary. "Bread is perfect," Jessa said finally, breaking the quiet. She looked surprised, a little defensive, as if praise was unfamiliar. Myra nodded once. "It will last the morning," she said. Then the youngest worker took another spoonful of broth. "I've never had protein taste like this before," he admitted. "It doesn't smell bad, but it feels different in my mouth." "That's balance," Myra said. "Heat, water, salt, time, that's all it takes." Korath chewed thoughtfully. "It's more than that," he said slowly. "You've taken what we had and made it stronger, easier to work with. You fed more than stomachs." Myra looked up just briefly. "Then it worked," she said. After the meal, Korath gave a quiet nod to Myra. "You're staying," he said, not needing to explain further. The crew returned to the yard. Myra stayed behind, cleaning the kitchen with care. She measured ingredients for the day, checked the remaining stock, and made a list on a scrap of paper. Korath lingered by the doorway. "You plan everything?" he asked. "Always," Myra said. "Preparation is easier than improvisation." "True," Korath admitted. "I see that now." The morning passed with the routine of the ranch. Myra watched the workers leave, sometimes following them with her gaze, noting which of them struggled with heat or fatigue. She made small adjustments to the meals she prepared. A pinch more salt for the one who sweated more. A slightly larger portion for the one whose work required more energy. By midday, Myra moved outside. She carried a small basket of preserved grains and herbs. Korath watched, curious. Myra walked past the pens of the herd. The animals were massive, strange shapes with tough hides and heavy hooves. She approached carefully, stopping just far enough away to avoid startling them, and spoke quietly in a human language. It was soft, rhythmic, almost like a song. One of the younger beasts, a calf with mottled gray fur, stepped closer. Myra held out a handful of roots. The calf sniffed and nibbled. Myra smiled faintly. "Good boy," she murmured. Korath raised an eyebrow. "You feed the animals too?" Myra looked at him. "If they are healthy, the meat is better. If they are stressed, so is everyone else." He did not reply. He understood. Humans had a way of noticing things other species ignored. She could see patterns in life and survival that Korath and even his foreman missed. By evening, Myra had prepared another meal. The sun was low, painting the plains in gold and rust. The crew returned, tired and dusty, but the smell of food lifted spirits before the work was even done. They gathered around the table, no longer hesitant. They had come to expect her meals, though no one admitted it outright. Korath tasted the broth first, as always. It was warmer now, richer, seasoned perfectly for the tired bodies. He noted the way the protein softened, the flatbread browned evenly, and the roots maintained a crisp texture. Mara had planned for the heat of the day and adjusted the meal accordingly. "Better than yesterday," Jessa said quietly, though her voice carried pride. Mara shook her head lightly. "Consistency matters more than improvement," she said. "You're not just cooking," Korath said. "You're teaching them to eat better." Mara shrugged. "Better eating makes better work. It's simple." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the smell of her cooking across the ranch. Even the older animals, who were typically wary of humans, moved closer to the pens where Mara had prepared small portions for them. They were not just fed, they were observed, understood. Korath saw the calm in their eyes and realized her skill extended beyond humans. Over the next few days, Mara's routine became a quiet backbone of the ranch. She rose early, prepared breakfast, noted the supplies, and adjusted meals for each worker. She kept the kitchen spotless, managed the inventory, and began small experiments with local grains and roots, slowly creating a variety of dishes from the limited resources. The crew began to respond. They worked longer without complaint, moved with more precision, and even offered small smiles during meals. Myra noticed each of these changes but never drew attention to them. She measured and observed, not praised or scolded. The frontier, she understood, was built on quiet influence more than loud orders. One afternoon, Korath approached her while she sorted dried grains. "The supply shipment will be late," he said. Myra nodded. "Then we make do," she said. "I have enough to last a few days. We stretch protein, adjust roots, and ration flour. It's not ideal, but it will keep everyone fed." "You make it sound simple," he said. "It's necessary," she replied. "If they go hungry, this place falls apart faster than the fences." Korath studied her. Humans often boasted of courage or strength, but Mara's confidence came from preparation and observation. He had seen soldiers rush blindly into danger, engineers fail to measure, and cooks leave a kitchen in chaos. Mara did none of these. She was quiet, steady, and surprisingly powerful in her calm. As evening fell, Mara prepared dinner while the crew cleaned the pens and repaired fences. The horizon glowed with distant suns, two small lights in the sky that promised warmth and light for the coming night. The workers moved more smoothly than before, their bodies guided by hunger that was finally satisfied by meals that nourished rather than filled. Korath sat at the table with Mara and observed the scene. He noticed how the workers paused to take in the aroma before eating. He noticed the young calf approaching Mara again, its steps careful and trusting. He noticed the way Mara adjusted portions without speaking, her hands moving like a silent conductor directing an orchestra. When the meal was done, Mara cleaned again, noting the few remaining supplies. She wrote a short list of things to request from the next shipment and planned small adjustments for the next day. Korath watched her, understanding something he had not before. On a harsh world like Cauldron's Reach, survival was not just about strength or weapons. It was about care, skill, and quiet attention to needs often overlooked. "You've changed this place in a few days," he said quietly. Mara paused, hands on the counter. "I just feed people," she said. Korath shook his head. "You do more than that. You remind them what it means to be human." Mara looked down at her hands. She had no answer for that. Humans were complicated, and she knew her value lay not in words, but in action. She smiled faintly. That was enough. Outside, the herd shifted with the night wind. Stars began to prick the sky, and the horizon promised another day. Mara tidied the last items in the kitchen, her movements calm and deliberate. The ranch would face shortages, storms, and predators. But tonight, with the crew fed, the pens secure, and the kitchen running like a quiet engine, the frontier felt a little less harsh. Korath left the kitchen, letting Mara finish. He walked into the yard, listening to the faint hum of the workers' activity. He realized that for the first time in a long while, the ranch felt like more than just survival. It felt like home. Mara cleaned the final bowl and placed it carefully on the shelf. She washed her hands, dried them, and sat briefly at the table. She looked at the horizon through the small window, thinking of places she had been, meals she had made, and people she had fed. On Cauldron's Reach, she had found a purpose. She had found a place where quiet skill mattered more than words, and where one human could make a difference simply by feeding others. The night stretched over the ranch, cool and quiet. Mara prepared for sleep, knowing tomorrow would be another day of cooking, observing, and feeding. She did not need thanks. She did not need praise. She needed only the quiet satisfaction of a job done well, the warmth of a well-fed crew, and the knowledge that on this small, harsh world she could make life better, one meal at a time. The wind carried a sharp edge that day, slicing through the ranch like a knife. Mara noticed it immediately when she stepped outside, her boots pressing against the dry, hard ground. The herd shifted uneasily, low rumbles vibrating through the soil as the massive creatures sensed the change. Mara frowned. The animals were rarely nervous, not unless danger was near. She took a slow breath and adjusted the straps of her apron. Korath approached, his expression hard. He didn't waste words. "Supply shipment delayed," he said. Mara nodded. She had already calculated the remaining rations in her head, the dried protein, the grains, and the herbs. She could stretch them, but only if she adjusted the crew's portions carefully and supplemented with foraged roots from the plains. "We'll manage," she said. "I can adjust meals, keep the crew fed, and morale stays high." Korath grunted. He didn't need to comment further. Mara's confidence was calm, not loud, but he knew she would deliver. That quiet certainty was something rare in humans, something that made them stronger than many creatures armed with claws or teeth. The day passed slowly. Mara worked in the kitchen, chopping, mixing, and adjusting. She measured each portion carefully. She boiled water, roasted roots over an open flame, and softened tough protein with slow heat. Outside, the crew worked, repairing fences and checking the pens. Dust clung to their sweat-streaked faces, but when they returned to the table, their movements were steadier, slower, controlled. By mid-afternoon, a signal came from the horizon. A small dust cloud, distant but visible, rising steadily against the sun. Mara watched from the kitchen window as it grew, a slow, rolling motion. The herd noticed it too, their rumbles growing, ears flicking toward the movement. Korath came behind her. "Visitors," he said. Mara shook her head. "Not friends, they don't move like traitors." Too coordinated, too deliberate. The dust cloud grew. Shapes emerged, 4 large transporters, black and angular against the red plains, moving steadily toward the ranch. Mara felt the shift in the air, the way the animals stiffened and the crew slowed in the yard. This was no routine trade convoy. "They're here for control," Korath said. His voice was quiet but firm. "The faction we've heard rumors about. They're cutting off settlements one by one. They'll want to take this place next." Mara paused. She was a cook, not a fighter. But she had learned quickly that survival was not always about weapons. Sometimes it was about strategy, preparation, and understanding people, or creatures. "Then we prepare," she said. Korath looked at her. "We're not ready for a fight," he said. "Then we use what we have," she replied. Mara moved quickly. She organized the kitchen, placing food in insulated containers. She boiled extra water, prepared roots and protein, and calculated how to feed the crew quickly if the faction arrived. She wrote notes on scraps of paper, small instructions for rationing, timing, and efficiency. Every detail mattered. By evening, the dust cloud had become a full, rolling column of black shapes. Mara had finished the evening meal for the crew. The table was laid out with bowls of steaming broth, fresh flatbread, roasted roots, and pieces of protein softened and seasoned. The smell drifted outside, carrying over the yard and reaching the approaching transports. The crew arrived, dusty and tired from fence repairs and herd checks. Their eyes caught the scent of the food, and for a moment the tension in their shoulders relaxed. Mara served quickly, carefully, knowing that food would calm nerves more effectively than any speech. Korath sat at the head of the table, watching the horizon through the kitchen window. The transports were closer now, shapes growing larger, engines humming low but menacing. He turned to Mara. "They will see us soon," he said. Mara nodded, returning her focus to the bowls. "Then we give them a choice," she said. "Feed them first, calm them, show them that we are organized and that we are not weak." The crew hesitated, glancing toward the horizon. Mara's quiet confidence held their attention. They had learned in the past days that she did more than cook. They fed strength and calm into the group, a subtle power that changed how the ranch operated. Soon, the first of the faction's scouts arrived. Small, armored vehicles rolled to a stop near the edge of the yard. Mara's hands were steady as she carried a large pot of broth outside, placing it on a low table near the gate. Korath followed, weapon ready but unused. Myra poured small portions into bowls, then set a flatbread alongside each one. The scouts looked at her, unsure. Mara's calm presence, the smell of the food, and the organized manner in which she presented it made them hesitate. She did not speak loudly or command. She simply offered the bowls. One of the scouts stepped forward, a tall alien with dark, scaled skin and yellow eyes. "What is this?" he asked. Mara handed him a bowl. "A meal," she said. "Sit, eat, decide after you are fed." The scout glanced at his companions, then back at Mara. He crouched and took a small sip. The broth was warm and rich, the flatbread soft and filling. He chewed, then another scout followed. Slowly the group began to eat, unsure at first, then with growing confidence as the taste warmed and filled them. Korath observed silently, his hand resting lightly on his weapon. He realized that Mara's influence extended beyond his crew. Food had a power even soldiers could not ignore. It reminded them of humanity, of trust, and of cooperation. After a time, the scout spoke again. "Why feed us?" Mara looked at him calmly. "Because no one wins by taking when hunger rules. Eat and then decide." The scouts paused, tasting the meal again. Mara watched their expressions change subtly. Their movements slowed, the tension in their shoulders eased, and they looked at one another with quiet uncertainty. Mara's calm, quiet skill had reached even those trained for control and intimidation. Korath stepped forward. "They will not fight while we feed them," he said. His voice was steady but low, carrying authority. The scouts looked to him, then back at Mara. When the scouts had finished, Mara refilled their bowls with more broth and offered flatbread again. She worked silently, adjusting portions, watching reactions, and keeping control of the moment. The scouts spoke quietly among themselves, clearly considering what had just happened. Finally, the lead scout nodded. "Your methods are unusual," he said. "We will not take this place today." Mara nodded. "Good," she said. "Now leave before anyone gets hungry again." The scouts retreated, returning to the larger transports. Mara and Korath watched them disappear over the horizon. The herd rumbled softly, sensing the change in energy. The ranch had survived another threat, not with weapons or brute strength, but with strategy, skill, and calm influence. Inside, Myra cleaned the kitchen and prepared a smaller meal for the crew. Korath walked over, sitting beside her at the counter. "You've done more than cook," he said. "You've kept this place safe." Mara shook her head. "I only fed," she said. "The rest was patience and timing. The crew, the animals, they did the rest themselves." Korath studied her, realizing that humanity's strength was subtle, quiet, and often underestimated. Mara had demonstrated that. She had shown that survival was not always about fighting. It could be about understanding, preparation, and calm action. The crew gathered around the table again, tired but relieved. They ate silently, appreciating the warmth and nourishment. Mara moved among them, refilling bowls and adjusting portions. She spoke little, but her presence was enough. Over the next days, Mara continued to adapt. She experimented with the limited resources, finding ways to extend supplies without reducing nutrition. She trained the crew in small tasks, teaching them how to prepare basic meals when she was busy or away. Slowly, they began to take initiative, understanding that survival on Cauldron's Reach required cooperation, skill, and careful planning. Korath watched the transformation with quiet pride. The ranch was no longer just a place of labor. It had become a community. Mara's quiet leadership, expressed through food and preparation, had reshaped the crew. They moved efficiently, worked together, and maintained the herd with a new confidence. One evening, Mara stepped outside to check the storage for remaining supplies. The sun was low, painting the plains in soft orange and red. She felt the wind on her face and listened to the gentle rumble of the herd. For a moment, she allowed herself to think about the past, about places she had been and meals she had prepared in quieter, darker times. Then she focused on the present. The ranch depended on her skill, and she would not fail. She had learned that survival was a quiet, deliberate act. It was in the preparation, the observation, and the calm management of resources. It was in feeding others and teaching them to work together. As night fell, Mara returned to the kitchen. She cleaned the last pots, measured the remaining supplies, and prepared a plan for the next day. Korath and the crew rested outside, their fatigue eased by the nourishment she provided. The ranch was quiet, secure, and ready for whatever challenges the frontier would bring. Mara stood at the window, looking out at the darkened plains. Stars began to prick the sky, and she felt a rare sense of peace. She had found a way to contribute, to protect, and to strengthen not with weapons or force, but with skill, patience, and humanity. The wind carried a promise of new challenges, new arrivals, and new threats. But Mara was ready. The kitchen was her command, the crew her allies, and the frontier a place where quiet strength mattered most. The next morning arrived with a sky streaked in pale pink and orange. Mara was already in the kitchen, her hands moving methodically over the countertop. The crew had woken early, restless from the previous day's tension. The distant hum of the factions' transports still lingered in the mind of Korath, and every shift of dust across the plains made the workers glance toward the horizon. Mara prepared breakfast with care. She measured the grains, softened the protein, and roasted roots in the oven. Her hands moved quickly, but each motion was deliberate, precise. She tasted the broth, added a tiny pinch of salt, and stirred until the aroma reached every corner of the small kitchen. She did not speak to the crew as they filed in. Their silence was a mark of respect. They had learned to trust her skill more than words. Outside, Korath and Jessa checked the perimeter of the ranch. The fences were old, worn from years of wind and sun. The herd moved uneasily, sensing the activity. Mara glanced from the kitchen window and noted the tension, her mind working quickly. She needed to feed not just stomachs today, but courage. When the crew entered the kitchen, Mara had laid out bowls, flatbreads, and steaming broth. The smell alone seemed to steady their nerves. They sat quietly, and Mara moved among them, adjusting portions, refilling cups, and ensuring each bowl had balance. The sound of engines drew everyone's attention. Mara remained calm, continuing her work. From the window, the black shapes of the faction's main force rolled over the horizon, larger than yesterday. Mara's calmness was deliberate. Panic would spread faster than the dust in the wind. She had learned that calm could control fear. Korath stepped into the kitchen, watching Mara. "They're coming in force," he said quietly. "I know," Mara replied, "but hunger is a tool, feed them, and the advantage is ours." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Mara had proven her skill in feeding them, but feeding enemies was new. Some of the younger workers whispered, worried about what could happen if the faction saw weakness. Mara ignored them. She had a plan, and it began with the meal. By mid-morning, the faction's scouts arrived at the edge of the ranch. They were cautious this time, armored vehicles rolling slowly, weapons raised but not fired. Mara carried a pot of broth outside, placing it on a low table near the gate. The crew followed at a safe distance, eyes alert but trusting Mara's lead. The scouts stopped, scanning the yard. Mara stepped forward calmly. "Sit," she said. She offered bowls of broth and slices of flatbread. Her voice was low, neutral, without fear. The lead scout, a tall alien with sharp yellow eyes, stepped forward. "Why feed us?" he demanded. Mara placed a bowl in front of him. "Because no one wins with hunger," she said simply. "Eat and then decide." The scout hesitated, then slowly tasted the broth. Mara observed every reaction, the narrowing of eyes, the shift in posture, the subtle relaxation of muscles. She refilled bowls without speaking, adjusting portions carefully. Each movement was quiet but deliberate, building control without force. Korath watched from behind her. "They trust food more than they trust us," he muttered. Mara nodded slightly. "And they will respect the organized, the calm, the prepared. That is our advantage." The scouts finished their first bowls, and their tension eased slightly. Mara offered more flatbread, this time warmed and seasoned with herbs. She spoke quietly, describing the ingredients, the preparation. She did not lecture, she did not brag. She simply showed care and attention. One of the scouts looked around. "Why do you bother feeding us?" he asked, clearly confused. "Because feeding is easier than fighting," Mara said. "Because a full belly allows clear thought. Because strength is built quietly, not with guns alone." The scouts exchanged glances, tasting the food again. Mara continued, moving among them, observing, refilling, and managing portions. The smell of food carried over the yard, mixing with the dust and the distant sun. The herd shifted but remained calm, sensing that no immediate threat had approached them. Finally, the lead scout spoke again. "You have control here," he said. "Your people are not armed, yet they are calm. You have influence." Mara nodded once. "Yes, influence is stronger than fear when used correctly." The scout looked at Korath. "This place could have been taken easily," he said. "But your methods unusual, effective." Korath remained silent, observing the crew. They ate, steadied by Mara's skill and organization. The scout continued, "We will leave, but we expect cooperation if we return." "The message is clear." Mara set down a clean bowl. "Understood," she said. The scouts retreated and the sound of their engines faded into the distance. Mara allowed herself a brief exhale. Korath approached her. "You just saved this ranch without a single shot," he said. Mara shrugged. "I just fed," she said. "The rest was patience and observation." Inside, the crew resumed their tasks, quieter but more confident. Mara continued to manage the kitchen, preparing meals that nourished both body and spirit. She experimented with local grains and herbs, creating dishes that were more efficient and flavorful, extending limited resources. Korath walked among the workers, noting their steady movements. They were stronger, calmer, and more coordinated than before. Mara's influence had spread beyond the kitchen. She had taught them through example, through the care of their meals, and through the quiet leadership of preparation. As night fell, Mara prepared another meal, smaller but precise. She cleaned the kitchen, measured remaining supplies, and planned for the next day. The horizon glowed faintly with stars, and the ranch was quiet except for the distant rumble of the herd and the soft hum of the crew finishing tasks. Mara stepped outside, feeling the cool night air. The dust had settled and the ranch lay calm under the twin moons. She observed the animals, the workers, and the fences. Everything was in order. Nothing had been broken, nothing had been lost. The threat had passed not through weapons, but through preparation, skill, and quiet control. Korath joined her. "You've done more than I expected," he said quietly. Mara shook her head. "I only feed. The rest is done by those who are willing to follow guidance and plan carefully." He looked at her, realizing the truth. Humans were underestimated. They were small, fragile, and often laughed at, but they had strength in their minds, their patience, and their skill. Mara had proven that strength could defeat fear, even without combat. The next days passed with careful preparation. Mara trained the crew to prepare food efficiently, to manage supplies, and to observe the herd and the land. She taught them to notice small details, which roots were safe, which herbs preserved energy, and which grains could extend protein. The crew responded, learning quickly, following her lead and gaining confidence. The faction did not return immediately, but the ranch was ready. Mara's calm skill had transformed the place. The crew moved with purpose, the animals were steady, and the fences held. The kitchen became a hub of strategy and preparation, not just nourishment. One evening, Mara sat quietly at the counter, planning for the next week. She noted supplies, calculated portions, and thought about ways to stretch resources further. Korath entered, sitting beside her. "You've done more than feed people," he said. "You've created order where there could have been chaos." Mara looked at him simply. "Food teaches more than hunger. It teaches trust, patience, and cooperation. That is stronger than fear." Korath nodded, understanding at last. On Cauldron's reach, survival depended on more than weapons or strength. It depended on skill, calm influence, and the quiet ability to manage people, resources, and creatures. Mara had demonstrated that humanity's true power was subtle, patient, and persistent. The horizon darkened, stars pricking the sky. Mara prepared for sleep, knowing tomorrow would bring new challenges. But she was ready. The ranch was ready. And humanity, through her quiet skill, had proven that even in the harshest worlds, it could survive, influence, and thrive. Outside, the herd rumbled softly. The wind whispered across the plains. Mara looked once more at the horizon, thinking of the humans who had survived before her and the people she would feed tomorrow. The frontier was harsh, but with care, patience, and skill, it was not unbeatable. The horizon glowed with the first light of dawn. Mara rose quietly, stretching her arms before slipping on her apron. The night had been still, the wind soft against the plains, and the herd had settled close to the pens, as if sensing that today would be important. Mara didn't speak to anyone yet. She moved with her usual careful precision, checking the storage, the ingredients, and the tools she would need for breakfast. The crew was already stirring in the small rooms behind the kitchen. Korath's voice called lightly, "Mara, breakfast will be ready soon." "The crew waits," Mara nodded. She had prepared meals before a challenge, but today felt different. The faction that had threatened the ranch for days would arrive in force. This was no longer a test of patience or skill with simple meals. This was a test of everything the ranch and its crew had learned under her guidance. The kitchen became alive with motion. Mara boiled water, toasted grains, chopped roots, and seasoned protein. Each step was deliberate, each action planned. She worked silently but efficiently, her calm presence anchoring the crew. She measured portions for the crew and left extra sets for any unexpected visitors. Outside, Korath and Jessa prepared the ranch. Fences were reinforced, gates secured, and the herd kept close to the pens. The workers moved with quiet confidence, following Mara's instructions from the previous days. The fear that had haunted them when the faction arrived before had faded, replaced by trust in her guidance and careful planning. By mid-morning, the faction's transports appeared over the horizon. This time, their numbers were larger, more organized, more aggressive. Mara did not flinch. She carried bowls of broth and bread outside, placing them neatly on low tables near the gate. The crew followed her, prepared but calm. Mara had trained them for this moment, not with weapons, but with organization, trust, and the power of feeding bodies and minds. The lead scout stopped his transport at the edge of the yard, scanning the ranch carefully. Mara stepped forward, offering the first bowls. "Sit," she said simply. Her voice did not waver. "Eat and then decide." The scout hesitated. He had not expected such confidence from a human, nor such order among the ranch workers. The aroma of the meal filled the air, softening even the harsh engines of the faction's transports. Mara served carefully, adjusting portions for each alien according to size and apparent energy needs. She moved calmly, refilling cups, rearranging bowls, and keeping everything in quiet harmony. The faction hesitated, unsure how to respond. Mara's quiet skill created a strange tension. They were trained for control and intimidation, but food had a strange power even over warriors. Hunger dulled the mind and sharpened aggression, but nourishment brought clarity and focus. Mara knew this. She had planned for it. The scouts tasted the first spoonfuls of broth. Mara observed every reaction. Their shoulders relaxed, their eyes widened slightly in surprise at the warmth and richness of the flavor. The flatbread softened and complemented the protein perfectly. Mara did not speak more than necessary. She let the food do her work. Korath watched from behind her. He realized something he had not understood fully before. This human, small and quiet, was leading without weapons, without shouting, without threatening force. She had trained the crew, prepared the herd, and controlled the situation with nothing but skill, patience, and food. The scouts looked at one another. They were still wary, but the tension had diminished. Mara offered more flatbread, carefully warmed and seasoned. She described the preparation briefly, without lecture, showing care and attention. Each gesture reinforced trust. Finally, the lead scout spoke. "This is unexpected," he said. "Your crew is calm, your place is orderly, you have influence." "Yes," Mara replied. "Influence is stronger than fear when used wisely. Decide after you eat." The scouts continued to eat quietly, their suspicions softening with every bite. Mara moved among them, adjusting portions, observing reactions, and maintaining control of the moment. The crew, trained by her preparation, moved efficiently, ensuring the ranch appeared organized and calm. Hours passed. Mara prepared additional meals, keeping the supplies balanced and portions steady. The faction began to recognize the skill behind the organization. Mara had turned nourishment into strategy. She had taught her crew, trained the herd, and extended calm throughout the ranch. The faction, despite numbers and aggression, could not provoke chaos. They were nourished, observed, and subtly influenced. Korath approached Mara quietly. "You've done it again," he said. "Without weapons, without confrontation, you've held the ranch." Mara simply nodded. "Food teaches more than hunger. It teaches cooperation, patience, and respect. That is more powerful than any fight." The lead scout finally stood. He glanced at Mara and Korath. "We will leave for now," he said. "This ranch is not weak. We will return only if necessary, but your methods, they are effective." The transports rolled away, engines fading into the distance. Mara allowed herself a slow exhale. She returned to the kitchen where the crew had gathered quietly. They had learned from her example, trusting her leadership and preparing for challenges with calm focus. Korath looked around at the workers. They were tired but confident, their movements steady and efficient. Mara's influence had spread beyond the kitchen. She had transformed the crew, teaching them to manage fear, hunger, and uncertainty. Her leadership was subtle but undeniable. Over the next few days, Mara continued to train the crew. She showed them how to prepare meals efficiently, manage supplies carefully, and anticipate challenges. She experimented with local grains and herbs, creating dishes that extended resources without reducing nutrition. The crew followed her lead, moving confidently and working together. The ranch became a model of organization and preparation. Mara's skill had transformed it from a simple survival outpost into a place of stability and calm. The crew moved with purpose, the animals remained steady, and the fences held firm. Mara's quiet leadership had reshaped the ranch into a resilient community. One evening, Mara stood at the edge of the yard, watching the sunset. The herd rumbled softly in the pens, and the crew finished their tasks without complaint. The horizon was calm, promising another day. Mara felt a rare sense of satisfaction. She had contributed more than food. She had built confidence, trust, and order. Korath joined her. "You've done more than I expected," he said. "You've changed this ranch. You've changed the people here." Mara shook her head. "I only fed. The rest was patience, observation, and planning. Food teaches more than hunger. It teaches trust, cooperation, and calm." Korath nodded, finally understanding. Humans were underestimated on this frontier. They were small, fragile, and often ignored, but they possessed subtle strength, quiet skill, careful planning, and the ability to influence without force. Mara had demonstrated that. The night grew quiet. Stars pricked the sky above Cauldron's Reach, twin moons casting soft light over the plains. Mara returned to the kitchen, preparing for the next day. She measured supplies, planned meals, and reflected on the crew's growth. They were no longer just workers. They were a team, ready for any challenge the frontier might throw at them. The ranch had survived the faction's threat, not with weapons, not with loud orders, but through quiet influence, preparation, and skill. Mara had taught the crew, led the animals, and managed the supplies with calm precision. The lesson was clear. Humanity's power lay not just in strength, but in intelligence, skill, and care. Korath and the crew gathered for a final meal that evening. Mara served efficiently, smiling faintly as the workers ate with steady hands and calm minds. The herd rested peacefully in the pens. The fences were intact. The horizon was safe for now. Mara sat at the table with Korath. "You've done more than cook," he said. "You've built a foundation that will last." Mara shook her head. "Food teaches more than hunger," she said. "It teaches patience, trust, and cooperation. That is stronger than fear." The crew nodded quietly. They had learned this lesson firsthand. The ranch was more than a place to work. It was a place to survive, thrive, and build community. Mara had shown them how to do it without violence, without intimidation, and without fear. As the stars spread across the night sky, Mara stepped outside one last time. The herd rumbled softly, and the wind carried the faint smell of food, dust, and calm. She looked toward the horizon, thinking of the humans who had survived before her and the people she would feed tomorrow. Cauldron's Reach was harsh, unforgiving, and often lonely. But Mara had proven that one quiet human with skill, patience, and care could make a difference. She had changed the ranch, strengthened the crew, and protected the herd, not through force, but through the subtle power of humanity. And in that quiet strength, the frontier had found its strongest ally. The ranch would face challenges again. The faction might return, storms would come, and supplies would run short. But Mara was ready. The crew was ready. The herd was steady. And the power of one human's quiet skill had proven itself stronger than fear, stronger than chaos, and stronger than the harshest frontier. Mara smiled faintly as she stepped back into the kitchen. Tomorrow she would feed them again. Not just to fill stomachs, but to strengthen minds, build trust, and prepare for whatever challenges the frontier might bring.